Hi, everyone, and welcome to the End of Life Journey and Beyond, the Sands of Time. My name is Lisa Strahs-Lorenc, and I'm a bereavement specialist. Always good to see you, Susan. Hi.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Nice to see you as well. I'm Susan Capurso. I'm an end-of-life doula and legacy specialist. And I am very excited to be here today with our guest, Kathryn. You'll
Hi.
introduce her in a second. But I'm very excited because I've seen Kathryn speak recently, and it really, she offers a valuable service, and it was very warm to my heart. So thank you for coming today, Kathryn. But
Thank
go ahead,
you.
Lisa. Please introduce
So
Kathryn.
I get to introduce Kathryn Monaco-Douglas. She is the founder of Widowed Not Alone. It is a large group for young widow and widowers, and it is a small world because I attended a gathering many, many years ago, and it was her gathering. And I met actually a Uniondale graduate from many, many years ago as well. So it is a small world. I'm very excited about having you here and talking about your group, Kathryn. So welcome.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Susan. I appreciate it.
Sure.
I'm
Why don't
happy
you
to be
start by
here.
telling us a little bit about your story?
Okay, so I was 42 years old, and my husband, Larry, he was 44. He developed a blood clot in his armpit, and we went to the doctor to get it checked, and the doctor sent us home, and the next day he passed away. So it wasn't just that he had the blood clot, but we did go to a doctor. They did do a sonogram, and it turned out to be medical negligence. I have 3 kids. At the time, they were 18, 14, and 11. And to say I was dependent on Larry is an understatement. I mean, I didn't work. I hadn't worked in 18 and a half years. I was a respiratory technician at a hospital in Smithtown for many years. And once we started with kids, I just retired to be a mom. And it was really difficult for me. I didn't pay the bills. I didn't know where anything was. We didn't have Google back then or Facebook or any social media. I couldn't read. I was totally traumatized. It wasn't like somebody could give me a book about grief and I could read it. So I was totally overwhelmed with my grief. My coping mechanism was sleeping. I would just sleep. And I kind of felt like my daughter didn't just lose my husband, she lost me too.
Of course.
So my sister signed me up for a bereavement group and my children. And I went to the group and I was like half in. And I did go though, and I felt like the last day of the group, for some reason, they did this candle ceremony, which we also do, and it just touched my heart. I felt like these people get me. They know what I'm going through. Like other people don't get what I'm going through. I kept coming across people saying hurtful things to me, like not really understanding my grief. One of the girls in the gym was comparing the loss of her boyfriend's dog to my husband. And, you know, I love dogs. It's not that it's just the comparison was hurtful. And they were just saying things that were just, you know, you should be over it now. When it was 6 months, someone said, she's not over it yet. I'm like, it's only 6 months. I was so devastated. So after I finished the first group, and I started to bond with the people in the group, it was the last night, and only a few of us exchanged numbers. They didn't have anything continued. It just ended after the 8 weeks. And I was like, what? This ends now? Now that I finally got it, I need more, you know? So I went across town to another group, and they put me with people that were my age now. And I just felt like I didn't fit in. I felt like they were all retired and their spouses were retired. And I'm young with young children that I have to raise. And the thing that I really didn't like was that everyone sat and shared the details of their loss. And I did that the first group. Now I'm in the second group and they're doing it again. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, I'm out of here. Who created this? Why do I have to listen to all their losses while I'm grieving? And I felt really overwhelmed with that whole like process of listening to everyone else's grief. It did make me bond with them. It made me feel overwhelmed with empathy for them. And like I couldn't even fix myself. How am I going to fix theirs? Like I was just overwhelmed with it. And I got up and I stormed out. I said, I don't know who created this program, but it's not for me. And I storm out and I'm hysterical crying on the way home in the car. And I'm like, if I ever get through this, I am going back. And not knowing if I would ever get through it, because it really feels overwhelming when you are going through it. And then in that first group, I met my husband now, Scott. He was also a widow. And we were helping each other with our grief. And we kept meeting, a few of us, him, another man, another woman, and we were meeting. And we were getting closer and closer. And then he asked me if I wanted to go for coffee. And I was like, nope, I don't want to do that. And I went home to an empty house. And then another weekend, it was empty again. And I was like, what am I waiting for? It's over a year now. Larry's not coming back. All right, it's just coffee. I'm not going to marry him. And so I had a cup of coffee with him. And after that, we started to date. And then, so 5 years after our loss, because his wife passed 5 months before Larry, we got married. And I adopted his children because I felt like I wanted my family to be more blended. I didn't want my kids to look at his kids as stepsisters, stepbrothers. I really wanted it to be blended. I waited a year after we were married, and I said to Scott, okay, now I'm ready to go back. And that's when I started Widowed Not Alone. So I went to the first place that Scott and I went to because I felt I wanted to give back where I got. And they rejected me. They told me I had to be a social worker or a psychologist. And I was like, okay, but I lived it. You know, what are you going to tell me that, you know, I lived this? So I had showed them what I was doing in the time that I was surviving. I started my own painting business, and I showed her my artwork, and I went home and I get a phone call from her. She says, well, we figured out something you could do, a chat group to teach people how to paint for singles and divorcees. So this is what I mean when people don't get it. You know, like, what would I know about singles and divorcees? I was married for 19 and a half years. So I was like, I kept it nice with her. I said, thank you. I appreciate the offer, but that's not what I'm looking to do. I mean, I had a full-time job and I had 6 kids. I wasn't looking to teach people how to paint. So that's when I called the church, my church, because they didn't have anything. And a little nun answered the phone. And she said, I can't believe you're calling. I just prayed that I needed help with bereavement.
Wow.
And when she said that, I got the chills. I felt like it was some kind of a divine intervention. Like this was really what I was meant to do. Not knowing anything about how many widows there are. I knew nothing. I only knew my own story and Scott's story, and that was it. And that's where they sent me for training. I went for training for 2 years, and I started my first group in 2006. And it was actually 4 older women. And I didn't tell them until the end that it was my first group. And they were surprised because they were like, you're really good at this. And, you know, they gave me the confidence to continue. And then the younger people started to come. And that is really what my niche is younger loss, because in the beginning it was up to the age of 59 and under, because all the other churches had 60 and over, but no one had for people that were 42, 43, like myself, people that are in their 30s, no one had that. And so people that were our age were sitting with people that were in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, because most people like lose their partner when they're older, you know? And that's why I wanted to do younger. And I took away that sharing the details. I felt that didn't need to happen, especially when the group started to grow. And we would have like 25 people in a room. And it was just me and another facilitator. We couldn't get anyone else to help us. It was just 2 of us. And we were like, it's not necessary to listen to 25 losses. by the time you go home at night, you can't sleep. It's too much. So we eliminated that. And I always felt from the beginning that I wanted it to continue, because I didn't like that I did the 8 weeks and then I had to go seeking another place to go to, and I've had people that have come into our group that have done 4 or 5 groups before they come to us, because they keep seeking and seeking and seeking. And then they like our group because we're a continued group. We don't end, which is something that a lot of them like. And that's why you met me at the gathering, because I would have these gatherings. So after the groups were over, we would bring all the groups together into a gathering. We would do it at the church, or we would do it out somewhere. I did a brunch. I did a changing lanes at the bowling alley. I did a few different types of gatherings like that. We did one at another restaurant. We kept doing these outside things. Again, we only had 1 group a season. Now we have up to 13 groups a season. It's
Wow.
that's how many we have gone up to, with how much we've grown over the years. I have 30 facilitators, which it's funny because for 7 years, it was just me and this other woman. And then Scott and I lost our son. And when we lost him, I was going to stop doing groups. I was like, I can't, I couldn't get, my grief was too heavy. I can't, so I went to my place of worship and I spoke to someone there, and he told me to take the focus off myself. And I was like, take the focus off myself. Okay, how am I going to do that? And I thought, well, I guess I'll do the group. And that group actually saved me. We were really bonding. There were 23 people waiting to come into that group. I would have left them with nothing. I told them at the end, I'm in the same place you are. I'm grieving heavy too. And my assistant had to do all the reading, Arlene. I couldn't read anything because I was all over the place with early trauma. It was so traumatizing when I lost him. His name was Brett. That when I called my best friend to say that Brett passed, I said Larry, my first husband's name. That's how she says, we know Larry died. What are you saying? I'm like, Larry died, Larry. And I'm crying Larry instead of Brett's name, because it just brought me right back. And so after I shared that group saved me, I got 2 facilitators out of that group. So that was that concept I didn't understand, because I didn't go back to heal myself. I went back to help others. And I just felt like there needed to be more for people that were in their 40s. That's why I went back. But when I went back the second time, I went back because what the priest had said to me, that you need to take the focus off yourself. And that helped me to heal. And the people that have come back said it has helped them also in their healing, even like you ladies are doing. It's healing to help others, So like sometimes Scott will say to me, my husband now, you're doing this because it makes you feel good. And I'm like, if I want to feel good, I'll eat ice cream. I'm like doing this because I know it makes a difference and it helps a lot of people. It's not just about feeling good. It's about that it's needed.
It is.
And you could see by the amount of groups that I do how needed it is.
Wow. So do you have a limit on how big the group can be?
Well, since the pandemic, we've been trying to keep it to 12 people in a room, where we used to go up. I mean, I did a group during the pandemic where I had 21 people in a virtual group. And it's hard because people can't share a lot, But then when that group was over, I invited them here to my home, and we sat outside spaced so we could have time to really get to know each other, because I thought that was important. And we did like extra groups during the pandemic because I just felt like that was the year of crisis. The phone was ringing off the hook. It was really scary time.
Wow.
So we just increased the groups, and I started teaching a lot, teaching how to facilitate so that we could get more people into the, to help.
Yeah. I love that. I love it because I love the idea of the age differences in the groups. I love the idea that, that you've taken that into consideration. There was nothing for me. My husband passed now, it's 9 years. And there was nothing except for that group with older people. And week after week after week, I would come back and hear the same stories about the bells and whistles in the emergency room. And I was trying to get past that because they were still ringing in my own ears. And it was
Right.
hard for me to listen to these stories over and over and over again. You know, I hate to say that because I've always been around different people of different ages. So I don't mean to say it like that it was older people, but they couldn't relate to me and I couldn't relate to them.
It's the
because
relating,
my
yeah.
boys were younger, right? And I still had so much to do.
It's the relating with where you are in your life at the time. So like in the 20 and 30-year-old group, some of them are pregnant. You know, some of them never had a chance to have a baby. They died too soon. They didn't have that opportunity. So they lost that. So for them to be sitting in a room where someone has kids and grandchildren and they were married longer than their person got to live, it becomes a conflict. Like
Right.
they're like, you're crying over someone that lived that you were married to longer than my spouse lived. Like my husband lived to 44. When I get people when I did the 65 and over group, which I did for 6 years, there were plenty of people that were married 50 years, 56 years. They were married longer than my husband got to live. So and I thought that they would have this like overwhelming feeling of feeling blessed that they had all those years. And what I learned in that group is that no matter how long a person lives, it's never long enough.
That's right.
Which I didn't understand that concept because I was so young when I lost my husband, and I would have done anything to double the time, you know, to have another 20 years or 30 years with him. So that's what I learned, that no matter how long a person lives, it's just not, if they're your love, it's just not, it's not long enough.
That's right. It'll never be long enough. That's right.
As much
That's
as our grief is the same, it's different in so many ways, right?
Well, everybody's grief is different.
Yeah.
You know, I always tell everyone that, and that's what my group is about. It's educating people about grief, because where do we learn grief? From our families, from our religion, our culture. Where do we learn grief from? We really, we don't. My mother and my family, when somebody died, they'd run around the house screaming with their hands up. That's all I learned about grief. And then they never talked about it again. So where do we learn our grief? I had to learn by reading and educate myself about grief, especially once I started to do the groups and seeing the different ways. So I learned that person was sick for a long time still felt like it was sudden when they went. Like that's something that people will say, well, didn't you know they were sick? No, I thought, we always have hope. We think there's more time.
That's right.
We never think they're going to go. We always think we have another day, another week, another month. They're shocked by it when it happens. So all this stuff, like I had to learn. And I feel like people in society still don't know a lot of, and that's why they say the hurtful things. People used to call Scott and I the Brady Bunch because he had 3 and I had 3. And when we lost Brett, somebody said to me, oh, now we can't call you the Brady Bunch anymore. He was only gone 2 weeks. Like, why did you just punch me in the stomach? Like, that was so hurtful to me. So that's where I feel like I want to educate people. Like, that's not what you say to someone who's grieving. What point would that have to say that? I know that. Right. I don't need you to tell me that. Just be there for me. Just be there for my kids. Call. See how they are, A lot of people got together and gave us gift cards. Like that was so helpful because I didn't feel like cooking. We were devastated. So just having the gift cards and saying, okay, let's go here. We have to eat. Let's just go here. And that helped, so I try to give people what you could do. So I say, like, it depends on the relationship you had with your spouse. It depends on your childhood. Before we started the podcast, Lisa and I were talking about her early grief. And I was like, that contributed to your grief, didn't it? She said, yes. So people don't understand that. Like if you had a tumultuous childhood, that's going to connect with your grief. that makes people, you know, like I feel I was very codependent on my husband, and that was part of my grief, that I didn't have to be independent. I had to start learning how to do things on my own. And, you know, the fear is big because I never did it. And I always try to tell my widows, you know, once you accomplish it, then you get the confidence. But before you do it, there's the fear. So I always say, like, do it with the fear, because then you accomplish it and then you get the confidence. You know, just like anything you do in life, you have to do it first to start. You know, I'm sure when you first started doing the podcasts, you were a little nervous the first one you did, then all of a sudden now you're confident, right? Because you're doing them so long. So it's just like anything else. So I try to teach them that. And there's a lot of family dynamics, how people don't know how to communicate within the family. And I had that with my children. I was grieving so much, I didn't know how to handle their grief. And we try to help them with that too. I try to bring in social workers and psychologists frequently to come in and do workshops with the groups. We recently had a woman that works with the FBI who, well, this online dating stuff, because we stay connected. So some of the longer members are going on these dating sites, and there's so many scammers that they need to know what to look out for.
That was
So
a great guest for you. Yeah.
We did a workshop on that. It's very interesting how these scammers can manipulate people. There was a woman in Oceanside that was scammed out of her whole life savings. So, and they prey on the vulnerable, and the widow is the vulnerable. Sure. And they know that. So when people put on their profile widowed, or they put on Facebook widowed, you're making yourself a target for these people. So I tell this is not where you want to meet somebody on Facebook. Don't do that, because you're making yourself a target to them, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah.
So how long does the group run? I mean, you've got all these groups, and they're continuous, right? So
right. So the group isn't continuous itself, as far as with us. Okay. So we start, we have a fall, a winter, and a spring group, and the group's 8 weeks. Okay. And in each group, we like appoint someone to keep the emails going. We call them captains and co-captains. So we pick a captain and a co-captain. We ask people in the group, which one of you would like to be a captain or a co-captain, because they keep the group going, you know, and if they can't do it for whatever reason, someone else will step up and help them. And when we see them again is at the gatherings. And that's why I like to do the gatherings. And we also stay connected on Facebook. We have the private grief group. We also have a private group called a networking group, where someone needs a handyman, a painter, social security questions, you know, not related to grief, but there's still things that we need as widows. That's on there. And, you know, sometimes some of the men are helpful. If somebody has a leak or something and the water heater, they tell you to shut it off. Like, who knows what to do when something happens, you know? But I have to say, like today, a lot of women can go on YouTube and, you know, they'll say, I fixed the toilet, you know? It's like a big thing for us when we complete something like that. So, but I made all these little subgroups. Like I made a little subgroup for those that had lost with suicide. I made a subgroup for those with very young children, for very younger widows, like the ones that are 20 and 30. So I made all these little subgroups that they could connect in, because I feel like, you know, especially the suicide, and that's a big topic, because there's not a lot of grief groups for suicide. And it's such a devastating loss, and people need more education on that, you know. So that's an important group to me.
You know, I love how you've come up with all the niche groups, Kathryn, because not many groups that I know of from 9 years ago when I looked around, not many groups do that at all. And by you coming up with these niche topics, your themes, you're seeking these particular people out, and you're able to offer so many more people such private and individual care, but you can tweak the groups, I think, from what you're saying, on that particular topic, like suicide. So you
Right.
might bring educational areas in
I'm trying. I'm
where you
working right
wouldn't
now
bring
to
that
get
in
more.
one of the other groups.
I
know?
keep trying to get more. So I always did the groups myself, and I happen to be doing a group right now because a few people took off for the season. But I stopped doing groups 3 years ago, and I just started doing going into each group so that I get to meet everyone.
Yeah.
Which is really nice. I come in, I share the experience I have of 17 years of doing groups, what I've learned. I share some of the books that I've read that are very helpful. And I get to meet them. And it really means a lot to me to know who's in the group. And so that gives me the time to seek people to come in and do the workshops, where when I'm doing a group, you're so caught up in the group, it's very hard to have the time to do other things that we need, that I feel like I always give them what I felt like I needed.
Yeah.
I'll make phone calls. Like if I feel someone needs a therapist and they're not seeing anyone, I'll make a private phone call and say, I want to talk to you about this. I wish somebody would have said this to me. I always say to them,
Great advocate. Wow.
Like, my kids had only one childhood. It was already compromised by the loss of their father. You got to try to be more present, because I regretted that I didn't have anyone telling me that. I would have, they grew up so fast, they grow up and they're out. And, I missed that time with my daughter. And what I did was, I just said to my daughter one day, once I learned, wow, I really missed her childhood. I was in a fog for most of it. And I said to her, I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you during your grief. And my daughter cried. So I knew I hit a nerve, and I said, let me make it up to you now. And every week I would drive into Astoria. We'd go to the Botanical Gardens. We'd go to the Museum of Art. And we bonded our relationship again.
How powerful is that? That is so powerful that you had the insight and the awareness to do that with her, because that absolutely, I believe, changed the path of your relationship with her, on the way that she goes on and continues to have grief in her life and in her own family with her own children. You changed that dynamic. And it's so important.
I think it's important that my daughter didn't feel that I wasn't there for her because I didn't love her, because that's where we get that feeling of unworthiness, when we think that we're not loved. So I didn't want her to know that I was just so heavy in my pain that I couldn't see past my pain. And I didn't have the right resources. So I did go to a therapist, but the therapist closed her eyes on me while I was sharing, which I shared in the presentation with Heinlein, that so the first time she did it, I said nothing, but the second time she did it, I was totally insulted. And it's so important to validate people's grief. I would never dare close my eyes on someone that's telling me that their husband died and they're struggling, keeping themselves out of bed to be focused for the kid. How could you close your eyes on someone that's telling you this? So apparently she wasn't the right grief therapist. She didn't know enough about grief. And I recently learned that many therapists haven't even seen a video on grief.
Wow.
Nothing. And they're counseling people that are grieving. And it's really challenging because they'll say things. I had one woman tell me that her therapist told her to forget about the birthdays and anniversaries. I said, what? Forget about the birthdays and anniversaries. Just erase them from your mind. I'm like, that's impossible. How could somebody tell you to do that?
First of all, that's the last thing you should do. The last thing.
But this is how backwards some therapists are, right? That's what I was saying to you earlier, that back in the day, 100 years ago, they used to tell people not to speak about their grief, to detach. And what they learned over time is that the attachment is what helps us to get through this. Always staying attached, always feeling like we're getting a sign and they're still with us. And the things that remind us of them is what helps us to get through our grief, because we're never going to get over it. We're going to learn how to grow around the grief.
Correct.
And learn how to live with it, to find happiness again, to enjoy life again, to not feel like you want to sleep all the time, and to recognize that your kids need you and your grandchildren need you, or whatever, your life grows into.
Kathryn would love your little animation, Lisa.
Yes, I was just going to refer to it. You absolutely
About the jar.
encapsulated it. Amazing. You have these 3 jars, and you have grief as a ball. And the top part says, this is what we thought grief was. And the grief gets bigger and bigger, and your jar is small and small. And then it says, and this is how grief really is. You have your jar of life, and you have your bowl of grief, but your jar gets bigger of life. And your grief is still there because it's always part of your life. But, there you are with your bigger life, your life
and
moving
people
on.
always say to me when they first come in, how long does this last? And what I say to them is, I can't fix it. If I could fix it, I would have fixed it for me. I can't fix it. All I can tell you is that the intensity lets up in time. It's the intensity that we have a hard time. And when we don't have coping skills and we don't know how to deal with that intensity, we're all over the place.
Right.
Some people are drinking, shopping, overworking. I did the sleep thing. I didn't know how to cope. I had no coping mechanisms, so we try to teach that in the groups. We try to teach coping mechanisms that are healthy, that'll help people get through it. The fact that they connect with each other is very helpful for them because it's very bonding. And we just try to teach them about how to go forward, because sitting there sharing how they died is not going to help us go forward.
That's right.
It's only going to keep us
Exactly.
the same feeling that we felt before we went into the group.
Exactly. But the grief doesn't go away. And Lisa and I talk a lot about that in our videos and about celebrating life. And it's 9 years for me, Lisa knows. It's 9 years. And that sounds like a long time. But yet just the other night, I had a dream. And I had a dream that Jim and I are sitting on a living room couch. And it wasn't our home, but in my dream, I thought it was my home. And I get up to get us something to drink, and every room is such a mess, right? There's a mess in the kitchen and everywhere. So I'm getting annoyed looking at these messy rooms. So I get our drinks and I go back into the living room and sit down on the couch, and I'm about to blast them and say, look, I need help around here. Can you please help me this Saturday? We need to get this house cleaned. And I look at him as I'm handing him his glass of water or whatever it was. And I thought to myself, oh no, because he's not dead. He's here with me. And I will never, ever complain again about a messy room or wanting him to do anything ever, because I'm just so happy he's back here with me. Isn't that weird? But this is 9 years.
Sweet dream. It's our thoughts, like the things that we complained about before when they were here, the things we took for granted, that now we could reflect back on it and say, those things don't matter. What really mattered was what we had. That doesn't matter. Those are things that, once you lose someone, you have a different perspective. And I have to say that, losing Larry young was very traumatic, but it changed the trajectory of my life.
Of course.
And my perspective changed about people, about life, and helping people. Like I serve others. That's what I do. My whole life changed because of it. Even my faith, everything changed. I think I was just, superficial, maybe. Like I look at everyone in pain with so much empathy. And that's why, I kind of feel bad, because I did do a 65 and over group for a while, but the pandemic made it stop because we got so full with the younger people. But I offer where they can go. There are so many places on Long Island that people that are over 60 and 65 can go to, even with people with longer losses. We only go up to 2 years. And the reason why we do that is because you can't sit in a group and be 3 years after your loss with someone that might be a month, because I take people right away. I'm known for that. I won't let anyone wait 3 months.
Wow.
When you're hurting, you need help.
Wow.
and you need help right away. You need to know those coping skills so that you don't start forming bad habits. You need to know right away that, this is what's happening. This is what's happening to your brain. Even the decisions, our prefrontal cortex is compromised. That's why you're having a hard time making decisions. You're not crazy. These are things that are happening from the trauma of grief. Like, I want to educate them so they know what's happening. So
Wow.
they know how to go.
I can't tell you how many times I was refused. I wanted to go immediately and nobody would let me in. And I kept saying to them, but I really need this now. I know I need this. I mean, I have a
Right.
counseling background. I'm telling you, I need this.
You
And
did need
I
it.
had to wait 3 months, just like you said. And it
I
was
don't do
horrible.
that.
Same with
I've
me.
never done that. I've always taken people right away. I never followed that rule.
Yeah.
I always felt
Wow.
that was wrong. In my
Me too.
3 months, I had suicidal thoughts. I had all these dark thoughts. I didn't had to cope. Couldn't think about my kids. All I could think about was that Larry was gone, and I can't do this without him. That was my only. I can't
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
I kept telling myself I can't.
Yep.
And I tell that to my group. Look, I said I can't. You're saying the same words that I said, and look how much I've accomplished. I opened my own business. I sold houses, bought houses. I raised my kids. I did this group. There's so many things we're capable of that we just don't think that we are, until we go out and we accomplish that thing we're afraid of.
Yeah. Yeah. And we are so much
Yeah.
stronger than we thought. So
And
much
as
stronger
human
than we thought we
beings,
were.
as human beings, we all go through these challenges, but this is a big challenge in life, and we just
Huge.
don't get it. We're not aware until the time comes. I thought the same thing. My husband started coughing. This is unrelated to his passing, but he would cough in the middle of the night, and I'd be awake sometimes and I couldn't sleep. And I'm like, I would just remember saying, oh, please don't ever let anything happen to him, because I don't think I could take care of myself. I mean, I'm smart enough. I've always been independent, but he takes care of us and he always has my back, no matter what happens in life. Don't let anything happen to him. And then once it did, that whole fear settles in that I can't, well, how am I going to do anything? I can't do anything. This is too overwhelming for me. And you do learn with baby steps that you can. I've managed to pay my mortgage now for 9 years without his help. And I never thought I
Amazing,
could,
right?
So it's things that you learn about yourself, you become stronger, and you do get through these challenges, and it's part of being a human being, right?
That's where the strength really comes from. It comes from when we're struggling.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you never went through any struggles, and sometimes I'll ask people, have you ever dealt with any other loss before? And they'll say no. This is my first one. And then I recognize how hard it is for them, because they have no knowledge about grief,
what they're about to go through.
And that's kind of happened with me. I had no knowledge of grief. My grandmother passed away and she was of age, so it was kind of expected. Even though my family screamed and ran around, it still was of age, where Larry was out of nowhere,
Right.
It wasn't expected. It was out of nowhere. And I have to say, like, even though it was medical negligence, and this is for any of your listeners, I was hanging on to that I was going to go after the doctor, because we were going to sue. And for 5 years, they made me wait before I got my lawsuit. I thought that once I won, that I would feel relieved or better, and I didn't. It was bittersweet because it doesn't bring them back, and I guess, you're hanging on to things. And I was just hanging on to that. Like, that's what got me through, that I have to fight back. I got to get back, that they did this to him. And I won, but it was a bittersweet one. It wasn't a good win. I mean,
Yeah.
It wasn't.
I went through a lawsuit too, but that was, it had been started before he died. I'm 14 years out. And what happened was, he was a lawyer and he was working for lawyers. And he was quite capable of being able to continue being a lawyer, but they decided he was not. And doctors wrote that he was fine, that even though he was on certain medications, he was still able to think and sort and whatever. And I thought that was discrimination. And I went to the Division of Human Rights and I filed a complaint. And I stated that I wanted money from the time that they decided he could not come back to the time that he died. And he died before that was finished. And I said, I'm going to finish this up for him. And I finally settled. And I did not get the full amount, but I felt like it was still something important for me to do. And didn't
Right.
erase the fact that he was gone, but
Right.
goodness, they took that away from him. Had he been able to at least work during the time that he was sick, he would have felt worthy. He would have felt like
Right.
he had something in his life.
It was
And
terrible.
they took that away from him. And for lawyers to do that, so that was my
I'm glad you
own-
fought for that.
yeah,
That was
I did.
important to fight
I
for.
did.
Yeah.
It was.
And that's how I felt about my Larry. Like, we went for help and they sent us away.
Mm.
And I felt like I had to fight for that, for him,
Yes.
because he would want me to,
Exactly.
and I just that's what kept me going, just knowing that I had that. I'm going to fight for this. But there's no money in the world.
That's right. That's going to bring your person back. That's right. That's
Doesn't
right.
change
Nothing.
the way that you feel.
Yeah. So for me, it's 23 years.
Wow. Wow.
And there's not a day that goes by that I don't think of Larry. So when people tell me it's 5 years, 6 years, I say to them, that's, excuse me, that's just a drop in the ocean.
But to them, it's a lot. In their minds, in their perspective, it's a lot to deal with. Each day is a lot to get through. Just being able to cope each
It
day.
absolutely is. Every day is difficult and the wins are small. But I always tell people, try to count the wins. Don't look at what you
Yes.
haven't done or what you can't do. Just try to look at the wins and try not to have expectations, especially of people,
Yes.
because people don't understand grief. They still don't. After all these years that I've been doing the groups, they still come in and say the same things. Someone said that their dog died, and they still say the same things to them. And I'm like, they don't understand that they're hurting you when they say that. You shouldn't compare any loss to any loss.
That's right.
Someone that says, well, I lost my brother, you shouldn't compare it. Just say, I understand loss because I had a loss. That's all.
That's right.
Let them ask you.
Yeah.
And I do believe it's the people that haven't suffered greatly or had those overwhelming losses in their lives that do make the comments and do speak that way. Because if you have, you would sit and be silent.
Right.
Just be there, be a friend.
Yeah.
I posted a meme yesterday that said something, you don't know about grief until you're in it.
That's true.
And it's so true. Until you're in it, no one's going to read about grief if they didn't grieve. Some people do call for a friend. They'll call me for a friend. And they'll ask me what they could do to help their friend.
Nice.
And I give them the best advice I can, like, just listen, validate what they're feeling, be there for them, and put them in a support group, get them a therapist. Those are the things we do for people we care about.
That's right. That's right. So how do people
that's what I was going to ask, Kathryn.
Yeah.
If somebody was listening today and said, oh my gosh, one of her groups might be right for me. What's that criteria? How do they get in touch with you?
Okay, so the criteria is 65 and under. That's our niche right now. Even though I did do older, I had to do the cutoff. I'm hoping if I get more volunteers that I'll be able to raise the age again, because I believe everybody needs the help. So right now it's 65 and under. I take people out of state. It's not just Long Island. We do a couple of virtual groups. The criteria is you got to be 2 years or less. And sometimes people have a certain situation where they're really struggling and they want to be in a group and they're a little bit more than 2 years. And if I have a spot, I'll put them in. Sometimes somebody's 66, and they're like, I just turned 66. I really, really need it. And if I have a spot, I'll put them in, but I don't always have the opening. That's the problem. So if I don't, then I recommend all the places that do. I do help people one-on-one. I have done that because I feel some people need help just with their grief. I'm not a therapist. I took a life coaching certification, so I do help them like a coach as far as the grief goes. They can find me on my website, widowednotalone.com, or on Instagram, I'm under Widowed Not Alone, where they can find me there. On the website, they can email me through there.
Kathryn, is there a cost to attend?
No, the groups are free. We all do it on a volunteer basis. I felt very strongly about that from the very beginning. I felt that, first of all, we lose an income with the secondary losses, and I always wanted people to know how sincere I was about what I'm doing. Like, I didn't want to do it where people would think I was doing this for the money, or I did that for the money, or I'm doing it for the fame, I'm only doing it because I wish somebody would have done it for me. And that's the truth. Everything I did was because it was all the things that I wish somebody would have done for me.
That's amazing. Really. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I just want to ask about your facilitators.
Yes.
So they go through a training with you?
Yes. So they'll do, so what we do now is we do a year where they observe. They don't interact with the members. They just observe. We do introduce them to the members and let them know they're widowed too, and they're training. And I sometimes try to move them around so they see different age groups, because we separate by age, so they could see, they do 3 seasons. So that's a year. And then I do a 3-hour class. What we know, I want to make sure they're going to stay in there. So I wait to make sure, because sometimes they'll come in and they want to do it. And then after they observe the first group, they're like, oh, this is not for me. It's bringing me back. I can't do it. And some people love it. Like, from my perspective of doing it was always, I want to bring you to where I am. From the very beginning, the second group I did where they were really young, I remember there was a girl in there that her husband died from ALS. And when she was sharing, I went home that night and I cried. And I remember crying and saying, you want to do this so bad. If you come home crying, you're never going to be able to do this. You got to bring them where you are. I talked myself into what I had to do. And the next meeting that we had, I had magazine clippings. I was prepared. I felt like you did it one time, but this is what helped me get through. And I gave them all my resources that I had. And I always go in like that. Like, I listen to their stories, I relate, but I'm going to bring you where I am, and that's how the facilitators have to be. They have to know when they come in, if they're too weak and they can't do it, then it's not for them, Yeah. They figure that out right away, though. One group, they'll figure it out.
Yeah, I bet. And does it matter their age then for the facilitators?
The facilitators,
yeah.
Well, they're all young because they've been in my group and they're coming back. Okay. I've had a few facilitators that are facilitating that didn't do our program. And when they observed the year, they're like shocked what they missed. Wow. So they start learning about themselves at the same time, which is interesting. And they too feel like, I wish I would have had this. Yeah. So yeah, wow. I've trained people like that. In fact, someone reached out to me from the Newsday article and they didn't call me back. So I feel like if you really want it, you'll keep calling me. I call you, you want something, you'll call me back. Yes. If they don't show up for the training, then this isn't important to you. Right. Because I never missed a night that I have group. I know that these people are counting on me and I've always been there. And I think that's important to have that reliability to these people we're volunteering, but I take this serious. This is,
this is their lives. Oh, yeah.
That I take serious, that I would never miss, be late, or not do what I needed to do as far as being a facilitator.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. Amazing work. Really,
Thank you.
Kathryn. Thank you so much.
And give the website.
Give the connection. Exposure. Yeah. Give the connection again so everybody has it again.
It's Widowed Not Alone. And it's widow with ED. So it's Widowed Not Alone. On Instagram and on my website. That's the best way to find me.
Great. So widowednotalone.com.
.com. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, we can't thank you enough. This is so important to people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great need.
Okay. And now we'll update what we've been up to. Susan, what are you up to lately?
What am I not up to, Lisa? That's a little overwhelming. I went from one extreme to the other where you try and keep yourself busy all the time. So a few things, my end of life care, you can find out all that information on susancapurso.com. I specialize in legacy work, so I help people, whether terminal or healthy and vibrant, to leave their memories, experiences, and stories in a beautiful 12 by 12 hardcover with hard pages, a book, and that's a 4-week project that we do together. And more recently, the Healing Garden, which is a bowl that you can send somebody who's recently had a loss, who's grieving, or maybe somebody with a cancer diagnosis, or even pet loss. Lisa, you've sent a couple pet loss bowls recently. And you can find all that on susancapurso.com. It's a bowl filled with stones and inspirational messages for whatever theme it is that they're going through at this time. And Lisa, how have you been keeping busy lately?
Yeah, so I still have my 2 books. They're about pancreatic cancer since my husband died of that disease, and Lustgarten Foundation is my go-to organization. So both books are on my website and also on the Amazon, and all the money goes to Lustgarten Foundation for research for an early detection and hopefully eventual cure of this disease. I work with COPE also. I know Susan does, and so do you. And so I have an upcoming Honoring Parenthood between Mother's Day and Father's Day on May 31st. And I'm looking forward to bringing people back to their parents and the legacy that they had for all of us. And I do individual work too, as well as you do, Kathryn. Unfortunately, I had too many deaths too early in my life. And I learned that this is part of life. And it made me who I am today, as you've said as well. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, Kathryn.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Kathryn.
you. Thank you
do
for
amazing work.
having me. It's
Yeah, and I love having this resource, especially here on Long Island. And I know you
Yeah.
do virtual work as well. So people should reach out to Kathryn for no matter where you live.
Yeah.
What a great resource to have here in New York. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathryn. Great knowing you. Thanks for the work
You
you do.
too.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
See you next week, Lisa.
Bye.
Bye-bye.